At exactly 10:00 on a Tuesday morning, the door to the executive boardroom swung open and the janitor walked in. 12 of the most powerful people in the company turned. Then the laughter started, because there he stood, 68 years old, in a suit 12 years out of date. The man who had scrubbed their bathrooms, emptied their trash, and eaten his lunch in a supply closet for 35 years now, standing at the head of their table like he owned it. "Did you get lost, old man?" someone called out. He didn't answer. He simply opened a worn leather satchel, reached inside, and placed a single document in the center of the mahogany table. The laughter died mid-breath. Marcus Calloway's face went white. The board chairwoman's hands began to tremble as she read, because the signature at the bottom belonged to a dead man. And what it said changed everything. 5:17 in the morning. Chicago in November. The kind of cold that doesn't negotiate, doesn't ask. Just walks straight through your coat and sits down in your chest like it's been there before, like it knows the address. Solomon Hayes knew this cold. Had known it for 68 years. He stepped off the train at the loop station and pulled his collar up and walked the 4 blocks to Callaway Corporation. The same way he had walked them since 1989. Same route, left on Wacker, right on Michigan. Through the side entrance on the north face of the building, because the revolving door on the main entrance had a slight drag to it in cold weather, and Solomon had learned, sometime around 1994, that the side door opened cleaner. Small things. 35 years of small things. He badged in with the maintenance keycard, took the service elevator to the basement, changed into his uniform in the locker room, locker number 7, same locker since the day he started. The combination lock so familiar his fingers did it without him thinking about it, and collected his cart from the supply room. The cart had a slightly loose wheel on the left front. Had for about 3 months. He'd put in a maintenance request, nobody had gotten to it yet. So the cart made a small rhythmic sound as he pushed it. A soft, syncopated click on every rotation. A sound that traveled down the hallways ahead of him like a signal. Here he comes, the invisible man. The 14th floor at 5:30 in the morning was Solomon's favorite version of it. Empty. Quiet. The overhead lights still in their dim overnight mode, just bright enough to see, warm enough to almost feel like something other than an office building. The cleaning crew from the overnight shift had done the common areas. Solomon's job was the executive corridor, the offices, the conference rooms, the places where decisions got made. He started with the hallway, moved methodically from the elevator bank toward the corner offices, dusting the display case, the one that held 37 years of Callaway Corporation history under glass. Plaques, photographs, product awards. A framed letter from a manufacturing association dated 1997. He knew every item in that case. Had cleaned the glass so many times he could have cataloged the contents with his eyes closed. He paused at the photograph in the center. Ribbon-cutting ceremony, 1988. Callaway Corporation's first official headquarters. 2 people. Edward Callaway on the left, grinning into the camera the way a man grins when everything he has bet on is finally paying off. Marcus Callaway on the right, 9 years old at the time, squinting slightly into the sun, holding a pair of ceremonial scissors because his father had given him the most important job. 2 people? Solomon looked at the photograph, polished the glass around it, moved on. At 6:45 the building started waking up. Not all at once, in layers, the way cities wake up. The way anything large and complicated wakes up from the edges inward, from the bottom upward. The security desk downstairs. Then the coffee machine on 8, which had a loud grinding cycle at startup that you could hear from the stairwell. Then the first executives, the ones who came in early to prove something, walking through with their laptop bags and their to-go cups and their eyes already fixed on the middle distance of their own priorities. None of them looked at Solomon. Not unkindly, just, not at all. He had spent 35 years learning the specific texture of this particular invisibility. It was not the dramatic kind. Nobody spat at him, nobody blocked his path. Nobody said anything overtly cruel most days. It was subtler than that. It was the way a room adjusted around him without acknowledging him. The way conversations continued or paused not because of his presence but simply because he was part of the furniture. The way people's eyes would scan a hallway and land on everything except him. He was present, always present, just unseen. The first thing happened at 7:34. Nadine Voss appeared at the east end of the corridor, 51 years old, Director of Human Resources. Silk blouse the color of slate, pressed to a standard that suggested she ironed it herself, and felt this was a point of principle. The kind of posture that cost something to maintain. Clipboard in her left hand, phone in her right. The specific forward momentum of a woman who had already completed 6 tasks before most people's alarms had gone off. Solomon saw her coming. She saw him too. The way you see a piece of office furniture you need to navigate around. Solomon. Not a greeting. The way you address a memo. The supply closet on 11. She stopped but didn't make eye contact. Eyes on the clipboard, then the phone, then the middle distance. I've had 3 separate complaints this week. The smell, coming from your lunch. He didn't respond immediately. He'd learned over the years to let a beat pass before responding to certain kinds of address. Not out of defiance, out of the quiet refusal to be startled into reaction. I'll take care of it, Ms. Voss, he said. I've mentioned it before. You have. The executive team uses that floor. She lowered her voice. Not out of discretion, there was no one nearby. Out of the particular emphasis that uses volume as punctuation. It's not appropriate for a cleaning closet to smell like someone's kitchen. He looked at her directly. She was already looking at her phone. I'll take care of it, he said again, thank you. She said it the way people say it when they mean the conversation is over and not anything else. And then she was already moving, already past him, heels clicking on the marble floor with that particular rhythm that meant she had somewhere to be and always did. Solomon stood still for a moment, just a moment. Then he picked up his cart and kept moving. The second thing happened at 8:52. Men's restroom, 14th floor. Solomon was cleaning the mirror's long, methodical strokes, the kind that don't leave streaks if you maintain the right angle and pressure, when the door opened and 2 men walked in mid-conversation. He recognized both of them. The taller one was Preston Wald, VP of Business Development, mid-40s. The kind of broad-shouldered ease that comes from a life where confidence has never been seriously challenged. He wore his suits well and knew it. The shorter one was Dev something. Solomon had never caught his last name. Junior executive, 28, maybe 30. Still in the eager phase, still performing readiness in every room he entered. They didn't register Solomon. Or rather, they registered him the way you register a piece of furniture that's positioned inconveniently. A mild mental note, and then passed it. Third quarter was a disaster, Preston was saying, moving to the sink next to the one Solomon was cleaning. And Marcus is talking about another restructure, another one. Like reorganizing the deck chairs is a strategy classic. Dev at the far mirror, straightening his tie in the glass Solomon had just cleaned. What's the actual number? Bad. Bad enough that there are conversations happening at the board level that are not going through normal channels. Preston glanced sideways at Solomon, and something shifted in the quality of his attention. Not discomfort, not guilt, something closer to amusement. Hey, he said it casually, the way you'd say it to a television that was on too loud. How long you been working here? Solomon looked at him in the mirror. 35 years, Solomon said. Preston blinked. That wasn't the answer he'd expected. He'd expected something shorter, something with less weight to it. Huh, he looked at Dev. Dev looked at him. Something passed between them. 35 years cleaning bathrooms. Dev smiled. Dedication, or something, Preston said. They laughed, not loudly, not cruelly exactly. Just the easy laughter of 2 men who had never had to think carefully about what their laughter cost other people. Solomon finished the mirror he was working on, set his cloth in the bucket, moved to the next one, his face completely still, not because he felt nothing. He had learned, very young, that feelings and the display of feelings were 2 separate decisions, and you got to choose which one to make in every situation. He had made this choice so many times over so many decades that it no longer felt like effort, it just felt like Tuesday. The third thing was Marcus. 9:08 in the morning, east corridor of the 14th floor. Marcus Calloway moved through this building the way moving water moves, not maliciously, not deliberately, but reshaping everything it touched simply by virtue of its current and its certainty about where it was going. 45 years old. Dark suit, charcoal gray. The kind that communicated authority without having to say anything. Phone in hand, 2 steps ahead of his assistant Claire, who was speaking rapidly and taking notes simultaneously with the practiced choreography of someone who had made herself indispensable and lived slightly anxiously in the knowledge that indispensability is not permanence. Solomon was pushing his cart along the corridor toward the supply room. Marcus walked toward him and through him, not physically, but in the way that attention goes through a thing rather than landing on it. Conference room B, Marcus said, to the air in front of him. to the concept of someone who could receive an instruction. Someone left coffee. It's been there since last night, handle it. He was already past, already around the corner, already into whatever next moment claimed him. Solomon stood with his cart in the hallway. The corridor was quiet again. He looked at the corner markets had turned 12 seconds. Then he turned his cart toward conference room B. The cleaning closet on the third floor was small, smelled like industrial cleaner, and the particular dry cardboard smell of boxes that had been stacked in the same position for years. The light fixture had a slight flicker, not enough to bother anyone who wasn't looking at it, very much enough to bother anyone who was. Solomon had been eating his lunch here for 3 years. After the cafeteria, after Marcus Calloway had made the comment, and it had been casual, genuinely casual, the kind of comment that costs the person making it absolutely nothing about keeping work areas separate, about the atmosphere, about the comfort of the executive team. He hadn't said, "The janitor can't eat here." He hadn't needed to. Solomon had understood the architecture of the sentence, had spent enough years understanding those architectures to read them on sight. He ate his sandwich, drank coffee from the blue thermos, the one Maya had given him when she got her first teaching position. Baltimore, 8th grade mathematics. She called every Sunday, asked about his knees, which were reliable but had opinions about cold weather now. He sat on his folding stool and thought about 1988. He always thought about 1988 at some point during the day. Not out of nostalgia, more like the way you touch a scar sometimes. Just to know it's still there, just to remember how it got there. March, 1988. Solomon Hayes was 32 years old. He had a mechanical engineering degree from Howard University, class of 1978. He had graduated in the top 15% of his program. His senior thesis on load distribution in precision assembly components had been cited in a trade publication the following year. He had applied, by his careful count, to 47 engineering positions in the Chicago metropolitan area between 1978 and 1988, 47. He had received 11 callbacks, 0 offers. At every callback, the men across the table from him had been polite, professional. The conversation had always been substantive. He had always been qualified, more than qualified in several cases. And at the end, there had always been some variation of the same conclusion. Delivered with regret. Delivered without explanation. Delivered in the particular language of institutions that have learned to say no without saying why. He was not naive about the reason. He had never been naive about the reason. He worked nights at Wilson's machine shop on the south side. Maintenance and basic repair work. It paid enough. He sent money home to his mother in Memphis every month. He kept his apartment. He kept his engineering books. And he kept going back to Wilson's. Because the machines were interesting. Because a lathe was a lathe regardless of who was running it. Because in a machine shop at 2 in the morning, the work was the only thing that mattered. That's where he met Edward Calloway. Edward came in 3-4 nights a week, using the machines after hours for prototyping work. He'd made an arrangement with the owner, a small monthly fee for access to the equipment during the overnight hours when the shop sat idle. Solomon noticed him the second week. Not because Edward was notable exactly. He was an average-looking white man in his late 30s with rolled-up sleeves and the distracted energy of someone whose brain was working faster than his hands could keep up with. What Solomon noticed was the way he worked. Quietly, methodically. The way a person works when they're solving a problem they actually care about, versus someone performing industry. Solomon watched him for 2 weeks, kept his distance, did his work, maintained the professional remove that he had learned through experience was the safest way to exist in spaces that hadn't specifically invited him. And then, on a cold night in March, Edward Calloway made a mistake. A small one. Easy to miss. A tolerance setting on a bracket assembly off by 2 millimeters, in a way that wouldn't show up in bench testing but would cause a shear failure under operational stress loads. Solomon saw it immediately. He stood for a moment. Had the internal conversation that he had learned to have quickly and quietly. The one that went, say something or don't, intervene or let it go. Trust that this particular room, this particular man, this particular moment might be one of the ones that goes differently. He walked across the shop floor. The tolerance on that bracket, Solomon said. Edward looked up. It's off, 2 millimeters, maybe a bit more. Solomon nodded at the assembly. It'll hold on the bench. But under stress loads, operational vibration at the frequency that kind of component usually runs, it'll shear. Edward looked at him, then at the bracket, then back at him. What do you know about operational stress tolerances? He asked. Not rudely, genuinely. I have a mechanical engineering degree from Howard, Solomon said. I also know how to clean this shop. Both things are true. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then Edward Calloway started laughing. The genuine kind, the surprised kind, the kind you can't perform because it requires actually being caught off guard by something. Okay, he said. Okay, he stepped back from the bench, gestured at the blueprint. Tell me what you see, Solomon told him. What followed was 4 hours of conversation that Solomon had not anticipated and did not afterwards know exactly how to categorize. They talked about the design, about the tolerance issue, and 3 others Solomon spotted within the first hour. About the underlying concept precision control components for industrial automation, which Solomon understood from first principles and found, the more Edward explained, genuinely interesting. And then past the design. Into the territory of 2 people who are strangers discovering they understand each other's frequency. Around midnight, Edward made coffee on the small burner in the shop office, poured 2 cups, handed one to Solomon without asking if he wanted it. That was the thing. Not the coffee, the assumption. The easy, unthought assumption that they were 2 people in a space together, and coffee was for both of them. Solomon had been in a lot of rooms. He knew how rare that particular assumption was. He took the cup. They kept talking. At 1 in the morning, Edward set down a letter on the workbench. Rejection number 11. From the last bank on his prospecting list. That's it, he said. Not dramatically, just factually. I've been at this for 2 years. I've spent everything I had and most of what I could borrow. And nobody will. He stopped, picked up his coffee. Nobody will take a chance on an idea from a guy with no collateral and no institutional backing. Solomon read the letter, set it back down. What does the product do? He asked. When it's working the way you've designed it, reduces production errors in automated assembly by 30%. Minimum. In some configurations closer to 40, and manufacturers don't want that? Manufacturers want it. Banks don't want to fund the guy who's trying to give it to them. Edward rubbed the back of his neck. The gesture of a man who had run out of moves. There's a difference between a market for a thing and capital for a thing. Solomon was quiet for a moment. He thought about the savings account. He'd started it at 22 the year he graduated from Howard. Had been adding to it since then, through every maintenance job and overnight shift. 10 years of discipline. Of believing that the money was accumulating towards something, a purpose he hadn't identified yet. He reached into his jacket pocket, took out his checkbook, wrote for a moment, turned it around on the workbench. $30,000. Edward stared at it, then at Solomon. I've been saving since graduation, Solomon said. 10 years, I kept waiting to know what it was for. A pause, now I know. Solomon Edward's voice had shifted. Something careful in it. Something that recognized the weight of what was on the table. This is everything. I'm aware of what it is. You don't know me. Not really. I know how you work, Solomon said. I've watched you for 2 weeks. You're rigorous. You're honest about what you don't know. And you find mistakes. The tolerance issue, you would have caught it yourself eventually. Eventually might have been too late. Yes, Solomon said. But you would have caught it. That's what matters. Edward looked at the check. I can't take this as a gift, he said. I won't. It's not a gift, Solomon said. It's an investment. I want to be a partner. The word sat between them. In a machine shop, in 1088 in Chicago. Between a white man who had run out of options and a black man who had been told for 10 years that the options were not his to begin with. The word partner sitting there on the workbench next to a blueprint and a rejection letter and a check for every dollar Solomon Hayes had in the world. 50%, Edward said. 51, Solomon said. Edward looked at him sharply. Solomon met his eyes. Because I want to know it's real, Solomon said. A 50% stake can be a courtesy. 51 is a commitment from both of us. The silence lasted longer this time. Then Edward Calloway picked up the check, folded it once, put it in his jacket pocket, extended his hand. Solomon shook it too. 17 in the morning. Wilson's Machine Shop, south side of Chicago. That was the beginning. January of 1989 was when Solomon made the other decision, the one that would govern the next 35 years of his life. Edward had offered him a formal role, engineer, design lead. His name on the letterhead, his face in the room when the investors came, when the clients came, when the world came to see what Calloway Corporation was and who was building it. Solomon spent 3 days thinking. He thought about the investor meetings Edward had described, the clients. The people whose capital and contracts would determine whether this company survived its first 3 years. He thought about what it meant to walk into those rooms in 1989 as a black man, and be the face of a company asking for trust and money. He thought about 47 applications and 11 callbacks and 0 offers. He thought about the architecture of certain doors and who built them and why. And then he thought about something else, about information, about access. About the specific kind of knowledge that accumulates when you are present everywhere and noticed nowhere. A maintenance worker went everywhere. Every floor, every office. Every conference room before the meeting and after the meeting, and during the hours when the building thought it was empty, and people let their guard down and said the true things. A maintenance worker saw the trash before it was shredded, heard the conversations through the walls and vents of a building that had been constructed by people who understood load-bearing columns very well, and soundproofing not at all. A maintenance worker was invisible in a way that was, if you chose to look at it correctly, a form of power. He went back to Edward on the 3rd day, sat down in the small office above the hardware store. Maintenance, Solomon said. Edward stared at him. I want to come in as building maintenance, janitorial, whatever you need, Solomon. Edward's voice was patient but firm. I just offered you a partnership position, a design lead role. The partnership agreement stays, Solomon said. The share certificate, the legal documentation, all of it. But I come in as maintenance. Why? Because in 1989, the face of this company needs to be the face that opens the most doors. He said it plainly, without bitterness. Just the clear-eyed assessment of a man who had spent 10 years learning the terrain. That face is yours, not mine, not yet, maybe not for a long time. Edward was quiet. And while you're opening the doors, Solomon continued, I'll be inside the building, learning every room, understanding how things really work versus how they're supposed to work. Watching, listening. He paused. There's a vent on what will become the 14th floor of any serious office building that connects to the main conference room. There always is. I'll know where it is within my first year. The quiet stretched out. This is wrong, Edward said finally. What you're describing, it shouldn't have to be this way. No, Solomon agreed. It shouldn't, then why? Because it is, Solomon said simply. And I'd rather work with what is than spend my energy on what should be. For now. They looked at each other. The agreement stands, Edward said. Every protection, full legal documentation, properly registered. The agreement stands. Solomon confirmed. They shook hands again. Same hands, different weight. Because some promises you make once and carry forever. The years were their own kind of accounting. 1989 through 2009. 20 years of Edward Callaway building something real. Something that grew from a converted storage room to a legitimate company with a lobby and a 14th floor and an executive corridor and a display case full of awards. 20 years of Solomon Hayes learning every corner of it. He knew the building the way you know a person you've lived with for decades. The way it breathed differently in winter and summer. The specific complaint of the elevator cables when they needed service. The water pressure issue on 11 that had been a maintenance ticket since 1998 and would probably be one until the building was torn down. He knew the people the way you know people you observe without being observed in return. He knew who stayed late because they were ambitious, and who stayed late because they were scared. He knew which executive relationships were genuine, and which were performance. He knew from the trash bins and the overheard conversations and the body language of people who moved through hallways thinking they were unwatched, a great deal more about the actual functioning of Callaway Corporation than most people who held titles several orders above his, and he kept his notebook. The Bira Rigida. A new one every few years. He was on his 5th, not a diary, not complaints, just observations, numbers that didn't add up, patterns that didn't cohere, things seen and heard that were filed away against the possibility that someday they would matter. In 1997, Edward had given him a 10% raise without being asked, had said simply, "You're worth more than I'm paying you. You've always been worth more than I'm paying you." Solomon had thanked him. Had thought, but not said, "You are worth more to me than you know." 2009. Edward Callaway, 59 years old. A Sunday morning, a stroke, gone by Tuesday. No warning, no goodbye. The particular brutality of sudden loss, the way it doesn't negotiate, doesn't prepare you, just arrives and reshapes everything. Marcus Callaway was 30 years old. He walked through the front entrance of Callaway Corporation on a Wednesday morning, and by Friday had rearranged the executive floor with the specific energy of a man who had been waiting for permission that had now finally been granted. Solomon had watched from the corridor, had thought, give it time. He's young. He's grieving in the way some people grieve, not inward, but outward. Through control. Through assertion. Through filling the space where the loss is with the furniture of authority. Give it time. He had given it 15 years, the supply closet on the 3rd floor. 11:47 in the morning. Solomon finished his sandwich, poured the last of the coffee from the blue thermos, sat on his folding stool and let himself be still for a moment. He thought about what he'd heard this morning. About the vent on the 14th floor that he had discovered in 1991 and used quietly for 33 years since. About the conversation he had overheard yesterday afternoon while polishing the display case glass. 387 people starting Monday. He thought about Darnell, who worked the morning maintenance shift and always brought 2 sandwiches because his wife packed 1 extra out of habit and he'd never asked her to stop. 22 years with the company, 2 kids in high school. He thought about the young woman on the 9th floor in accounts payable. He didn't know her name. She'd never told it to him. But she said good morning every single morning with the kind of warmth that suggested she meant it. Who had been there 4 years and was, from what Solomon had observed, very good at her job. He thought about the R&D team on 11, the ones who stayed late on Thursdays, who ordered pizza and worked past 9 and were, from the fragments of conversations Solomon had gathered through doors and vents and the particular acoustic luck of old office buildings, working on something that might actually be worth working on. If anyone would let them finish it. 387 people, handle it. He packed away his thermos, folded his stool, put it behind the supply shelving the way he always did, out of sight because someone had once made a comment about clutter. He put on his cart and went back to work, and his face was still, and his hands were steady, and something in the deepest, most patient part of Solomon Hayes, the part that had been accumulating this particular readiness for 35 years, had quietly made a decision. 9:47 that evening. The building was mostly empty. The cleaning crew had finished the common areas. Security was on the overnight rotation. The only lights on were the corridor emergency strips and the glow from a few offices where people were burning the kind of midnight oil that doesn't mean dedication, so much as it means fear of what happens if they stop. Solomon went to the basement, to the locker room, to locker number 7. He opened it, took out his cleaning uniform, the spare, kept fresh for emergencies, set it on the bench beside him, looked at it for a moment, then reached past it, past the folded spare towels, past the extra pair of rubber gloves, past the things that were the official contents of this locker, and took out the leather satchel, brown, old, the brass clasps worn down to a color that was more memory than metal, the leather darkened at the corners from 35 years of occasional handling. It had lived in this locker since 1989, had been moved twice when the locker room was refurbished, both times by Solomon himself, at night, when no one was watching. He sat on the bench, set the satchel on his knees, unclipped the clasps, opened it inside, in layers of clear archival plastic, the kind Solomon had researched specifically in 1994. Because he had decided if he was going to keep these documents for decades, he was going to keep them correctly, were papers. Partnership agreement. 1988, 2 signatures. Solomon Marcus Hayes. Edward James Callaway. The language unambiguous in the way that Edward had insisted it be unambiguous, because Edward had been many things and imprecise was not one of them. The share certificate. 51% of Callaway Corporation. Issued to Solomon Marcus Hayes. Dated March 19, 1988. The SEC registration. Filed April 3, 1988. Notarized. The kind of document that exists in a database somewhere with a timestamp and a case number that doesn't expire. The trust documentation. Through every corporate restructuring 1994, 2001, 2008, 2019 the Hayes Trust had been preserved, not hidden, not archived into inaccessibility, just present in the paperwork, processed by lawyers and accountants and administrators who had seen the notation and assumed it was a legacy holdover from the founding period, and had neither the curiosity nor the incentive to investigate further. S.H. Trust, Solomon Hayes. hiding in plain sight, like he always had, and then the photograph. He picked it up carefully. Even through the plastic sleeve, he was careful with it. 3 people. Ribbon cutting. 1988. The banner behind them read Callaway Corporation grand opening in letters that someone had clearly made by hand. Edward in the center, grinning. The same grin Solomon knew from 20 years of watching, but younger. Brighter. Unguarded in the way a person is unguarded on the day a dream stops being a dream and becomes a thing with an address. Marcus on Edward's right, 9 years old, squinting into the sun, holding the scissors, and Solomon on Edward's left, 32 years old, in the good shirt he'd worn because Edward had told him to dress up a little. It was a special occasion, laughing. Genuinely laughing at something Edward had just said. One of Edward's terrible engineering puns that he'd told approximately 40 times over the years and found funnier each time. And Solomon had given up, pretending not to find funny around 1993. 3 people. The photograph on the 14th floor display case showed 2. Solomon set the picture down. He looked at the share certificate again. He thought about 35 years. About the patients he had chosen and the cost it had carried, and the things he had told himself about why the time wasn't right. The early years, fair enough, the middle years perhaps, and then Edward's death, and Marcus's first year when Solomon had thought, give it time, and Marcus's 5th year when he had thought, give it more time, and Marcus's 15th year. When Marcus had said handle it about a coffee spill and 387 people and a 68-year-old man who was on paper the majority owner of the company doing the dismissing, Solomon looked at the small mirror inside the locker door, looked at himself. The man in the mirror was 68 years old, white hair, lines in his face that were the honest record of decades, hands that had wrung out mops and replaced fluorescent tubes and fixed sticky doors and known every corner of a building that technically, legally, on paper that was right here in this satchel, belonged to him. The man in the mirror looked back, not angry, not desperate, not even sad exactly, just ready, the way a thing is ready that has been prepared for a very long time. Enough, Solomon Hayes said, quietly to his reflection, to the locker room, to the 35 years that had been building toward this particular Tuesday evening in November. Just the one word. Enough. He closed the satchel, clicked the clasps shut and left it out, not in the locker, on the bench beside him. Because tomorrow morning he would be bringing it with him, and he would not be bringing the cart. The suit had been hanging in the back of his closet since August of 2012. Dark charcoal, single button. The kind of suit a man buys once for a specific occasion and then keeps because getting rid of it feels like letting go of the day itself. Solomon had bought it for Maya's wedding, hot August. The kind of Chicago August that makes the city feel like a place that has forgotten its own better judgment. He had danced at that wedding, badly. Deliberately badly, in the way fathers dance at their daughters' weddings when they want to make her laugh. It had worked. Maya had laughed so hard, she'd grabbed his arm to keep her balance and said, "Daddy, stop," and he hadn't stopped for another full minute. That was the last time he'd worn this suit. He took it off the hanger at 5:49 in the morning. The locker room was empty. The fluorescent light above him buzzed the same pitch it had buzzed since 1997. Solomon had replaced the tube 4 times. He knew the exact sound of it the way you know old sounds, the way they become part of the silence rather than interruptions of it. He put on the white shirt first, then the suit jacket, the trousers. The tie navy, the only one he owned, kept in the satchel with the documents, because it had no other home in his life and this had seemed like the right place for it. He stood in front of the small mirror inside locker number 7. The mirror was not large, not generous. The kind of mirror that shows you what you need to see and nothing more. Solomon looked at himself in it for a long moment. Dark suit, white shirt, navy tie, hair combed back, white as January, neat as intention. He looked like someone's grandfather going to church. He looked like a man who had been patient for 35 years and was done. Both things were true at once. He picked up the leather satchel, clicked off the locker room light, and walked to the main elevator. Not the service one. The 14th floor at 9:58 in the morning was the organized kind of busy, the kind that means something is about to be decided. Assistants moving with the specific purposefulness of people who know the agenda, laptops being carried, voices lower than usual, which meant higher stakes than usual. The particular electrical charge in the air that gathers before a room full of people make decisions about other people's lives. Solomon stepped off the elevator. He walked the corridor he had cleaned every morning for 35 years, past the display case, past the conference room where he'd stood outside yesterday and heard everything, past 3 people who looked at him, looked away, looked back, because something was wrong with this picture and their brains were doing the work of trying to identify it. He was familiar, obviously familiar. The face was one they'd seen every morning for years, some of them, but the context was wrong. No cart, no uniform. Just a man in a dark suit carrying an old leather satchel walking down the 14th floor corridor like he'd been invited, which he had, by himself. 35 years ago, Marcus's assistant was Claire, 26, efficient with the anxious precision of someone who has made herself useful and understands the fragility of usefulness. She sat at the desk outside the main conference room, with her headset and her tablet, and the professional composure of someone who had been trained to handle everything. She had not been trained for this. She looked up, registered Solomon, and her face did the thing faces do when information doesn't resolve into sense. Familiar. Wrong context. Does not compute. Sir. The word came out with a question mark she hadn't meant to include. The board is in a private session. It's a closed meeting, you can't. Solomon didn't slow down, sir. He opened the conference room door. The room went quiet in stages. The way quiet moves through a space not all at once, but in a ripple, from the point of disruption outward. The 2 board members nearest the door first, then the ones at the middle of the table, then the far end, the ones who had to turn to see what was causing the stillness, until 12 people were looking at the doorway, at Solomon Hayes, in his 2012 wedding suit, carrying an old leather satchel, standing in the entrance to the 14th floor conference room of Callaway Corporation, with the specific stillness of a man who has been waiting for this moment for a very long time and intends to inhabit every second of it. Marcus was at the head of the table. He'd been mid-sentence. Whatever he'd been saying dissolved. He stared. Then recognition arrived. The particular recognition of a man who has passed the same face in the hallway for years without seeing it, and is now forced to see it in a context that makes no sense. Hayes, not a question, a placement. The tone of a man who is still confident that this is a problem he can resolve in the next 30 seconds. What are you doing in here? Did someone not? Solomon walked to the table, set the satchel down, opened it and placed the share certificate in the center of the mahogany table. 51%, Callaway Corporation. Solomon Marcus Hayes. Edward James Callaway's signature at the bottom, in the specific handwriting that anyone who had ever received a memo from Edward would recognize immediately. The SEC seal embossed in the upper right corner, faded with age but unmistakable. The laughter that had started a few people, low, uncertain, following Marcus's lead stopped. Like a candle in a sudden wind, here and then not. Vivian Cross moved first, 62 years old, 19 years on this board. The kind of woman who had navigated enough corporate rooms to have very good instincts about when something real was happening versus when something was being performed. She reached for the document. Read it again. Slower the second time. The color in her face changed in a way Solomon had been imagining for 3 years. Marcus? Her voice was controlled, professionally controlled. But underneath it, the way something moves under ice when the temperature has changed. This is your father's signature. It's a forgery. Marcus said it immediately. Too immediately. The speed of a man who needs the answer to be simple. The SEC registration seal also forged. Marcus call legal. He said it to the room, to anyone in the room with a phone and the willingness to use it. And get security up here now. Solomon reached into the satchel, calmly. The way you move when you have rehearsed this moment in your mind for years and the rehearsal has given you a kind of steady ownership of it. He set down the SEC filing, the notarized trust agreement, the corporate restructuring records from 1994, 2001, 2008, and 2019. Each one processed by Callaway Corporation's own legal department. Each one bearing the SH Trust notation that had been present through every reorganization for 35 years, because nobody had ever had a reason to question it, because nobody had ever thought to look. He placed them in a row on the table, one at a time, and said nothing, because the documents were already speaking, and they had 35 years of things to say. Vivian called for a vote at 10:23. The motion, temporary suspension of Marcus Callaway's executive authority, pending independent legal review of the ownership documentation. 5 in favor, 3 against. The 3 against were the board members Solomon had watched, over the years, position themselves closest to Marcus's decisions, who had attended his dinners, who had never in his recollection disagreed with him in a formal setting. The 5 in favor included Vivienne and 4 others who had read the documents and understood, whatever their personal feelings about the situation, that the correct next move was not to pretend they hadn't. Marcus's face during the 3 minutes of voting was something Solomon had not anticipated and would not forget. Not the anger, he expected anger, not the contempt, he'd expected that too. What he hadn't expected was the fear, real fear. The kind that arrives when the floor a person has been standing on their entire adult life turns out to be resting on an assumption that was never checked. This is Marcus stopped, started again, quieter now. The quiet of a man recalculating. This is not over, you understand that. Whatever you think you've walked in here with, this is not over. Vivienne looked at him steadily. No one said it was, she said. We said your authority is suspended pending review. Those are 2 different things. Marcus looked at Solomon. For a long moment, the first Solomon realized that Marcus Calloway had ever actually looked at him. Not through him, not past him, at him. And Solomon held that gaze the way a man holds a gaze when he has earned the right to and knows it. Then Marcus picked up his phone and walked out. Theo Bancroft found Solomon in the hallway at 10:51, 29 years old, accounting 9th floor. The slightly too large dress shirts of a man still dressing for who he was trying to become. He came around the corner fast, slowed when he saw Solomon, and then stopped completely in the way people stop when they've made a decision and are about to find out if it's going to hold. I have something, he said. No preamble, no pleasantries. The voice of someone who had been carrying this for a long time and needed to set it down. 8 months of documentation, Theo said. Transactions that don't reconcile. Account names that don't correspond to any registered entity. I checked 3 times. Twice in the system, once with external verification. Solomon looked at him steadily. I tried to raise it in April. Theo's jaw tightened briefly. My direct supervisor told me to drop it and document that I'd dropped it. A pause, which I understood, and then Curtis Hale called me in July. Something moved through Theo's expression. Not quite fear, the memory of fear. He was very polite about it, very clear. He swallowed once. I understood that too. But you kept the files. Personal drive, off network. He reached into his jacket pocket, held out a USB drive. I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if it changes anything. He looked at Solomon directly. The way young people look at older people when they're asking something they don't have the words for yet. Does it matter? Doing the right thing when nobody's watching, when it costs something. Is it actually worth anything in the end? Solomon looked at Theo Bancroft, 29 years old. Holding a USB drive that had cost him 8 months of anxiety and 1 very unpleasant phone call, and the daily low-grade stress of knowing something that he had not been able to do anything about. Until now. Solomon thought about himself at 29, about 47 applications, about a check for $30,000 slid across a workbench in the middle of the night, about the specific kind of faith that makes you act before you can see the outcome. I spent 35 years doing the right thing, Solomon said, quietly. Without anyone in this building knowing my first name. He paused, and here I stand. Theo looked at him. Give me the drive, Solomon said. Theo placed it in his palm. Special Agent Carla Simmons arrived at 2:15 in the afternoon. FBI. Financial Crimes and Cybersecurity Division. She was mid-40s, trim, with the particular quality of unhurried attention that distinguishes people who have sat across from a lot of people who thought they were the most important person in the room. She asked to speak with Solomon privately. They used the small meeting room on the 6th floor, the one with the round table and the single window facing north. Solomon had cleaned this room every Tuesday for 35 years. He knew the way the afternoon light came through that window at this hour, low, slightly gold, the angle of November in Chicago. Simmons set a folder on the table. Callaway Corporation has been under financial investigation since February 2022, she said. The investigation was initiated based on an anonymous submission, which became a pattern of anonymous submissions, quarterly, for 3 years. She opened the folder, turned a page toward him. Solomon looked at it. The signature at the bottom of each submission document, a friend of the company. Written in careful block letters, legible, anonymous. And underneath the anonymity, for anyone who looked closely enough at the specific vocabulary, and the specific categories of documentation flagged the unmistakable perspective of someone who had watched this company from the inside for a very long time. Solomon said nothing. Simmons said, "We're not here to create complications for you, Mr. Hayes. What this person did is legally protected. What this person provided has been essential. She closed the folder. Is there anything you'd like to say about the documentation? Solomon looked at her. Do you have enough, he said, to protect the people on the layoff list? Simmons held his gaze for a moment. We will, she said, especially after today. Solomon nodded once, stood up. Then we're good, he said. Marcus moved fast. You had to acknowledge that at least. By 4:00 p.m. Wednesday, 3 separate counterattacks had been launched with the efficiency of someone who had thought about contingencies. The first, Marcus's banking connections. A hold placed on Callaway Corporation's primary operating accounts. Legal grounds, allegedly disputed ownership, pending resolution. The practical effect, Friday's payroll was in question. 400 people, mortgages, car payments. The particular panic that spreads through a workforce when the word payroll and the word problem appear in the same sentence. Second, Curtis Hale on a phone. 23 calls to senior personnel across 6 departments. An opportunity. Curtis framed it, a new venture, visionary leadership. Compensation 40% above current levels. And underneath the professional language, a message that needed no translation. The ship is going down, and I'm offering you a lifeboat. The third, Hensley & Burke, Marcus's legal firm of choice for situations requiring aggression dressed as precision. An emergency injunction filed by 5:00 p.m. challenging the legal validity of the 1988 ownership agreement. The argument. Inadequate consideration. $30,000 in 1988, the filing asserted, could not constitute reasonable compensation for majority ownership of what Callaway Corporation had become. Solomon read the injunction summary in the office on the 15th floor. He read it twice. He thought about the machine shop. The 2 in the morning, the coffee, the blueprint with the tolerance error that 3 engineers had missed. The specific look on Edward Callaway's face when Solomon walked across the shop floor and told him what he saw. Inadequate consideration. He set the document down, looked out the window at Chicago going about its evening. Then he picked up the phone and called Vivian. I read it, he said. So did I, Vivian said. What do you think? I think, she said, that $30,000 in 1988 represented something that the filing very carefully does not quantify. Which is the problem for them. A pause. The court will want to know what Edward intended, not just what he signed. He intended exactly what he wrote, Solomon said. I know that, Vivian said. We need to make sure the court knows it too. Thursday morning, 9:00 a.m., the company auditorium, 2nd floor. Solomon had cleaned this room hundreds of times, buffed the stage floor, replaced the lights in the ceiling rigging, fixed the microphone stand twice, once in 2006, and once in 2018, both times because the adjustment mechanism had been over-tightened by someone who didn't know how adjustment mechanisms worked. He had never stood on the stage. He stood on it now. Below him, nearly 400 people, every seat filled. Standing room along both walls and the back. The specific tight-wound energy of people who have heard enough to be scared and not enough to know what to do about the fear. The rumors about payroll had moved through the building, the way rumors move through buildings, faster than email, slower than truth, arriving in a version that was approximately accurate and maximally anxiety-inducing. Solomon looked out at them. He knew these faces. Not because he'd been introduced to them. Not because he'd sat in meetings with them or attended company retreats or been included in any of the structures through which people in organizations come to know each other. He knew them the way a person knows people they've observed consistently for years from a position of invisibility. He knew Darnell, maintenance crew, 3rd row, who always had 2 sandwiches because his wife packed extra out of a habit that had started when their kids were small and never stopped. 22 years with the company. The laugh lines around his eyes went deep. He knew the woman in the 5th row accounts payable, 9th floor, who said good morning every single morning, with the specific warmth of someone who meant it without performing it. He had worked in this building for 4 years alongside her and did not know her name. She had never told it to him. He had never been introduced. He knew the R&D team clustered together near the left wall, the ones who stayed late on Thursdays, who were working on something worth working on, who had been trying to work on it for 2 years while the budget for their work was quietly redirected to places that had nothing to do with innovation. 387 people on a list. Solomon leaned toward the microphone. He had no notes, no prepared remarks, no sentences rehearsed in front of a mirror. Just 35 years of watching this building and the people in it, and the truth which he had found, over a long life, required less preparation than most things. I want to start with something simple, he said. The room was very quiet. Most of you don't know my first name. Nobody contradicted him. That's not a complaint. I'm not standing up here to complain about that. I'm telling you because it's part of the story, and the story matters right now. He looked across the auditorium. My name is Solomon Hayes. I have worked in this building since 1989. I have cleaned your offices and your conference rooms and the bathroom on 14 that nobody ever wants to clean. I've fixed the door on the 4th floor that sticks every winter 4 times now. I replaced the fluorescent tube in the basement break room enough times that I know the part number from memory. A murmur moved through the room. Not laughter exactly, something softer, recognition. I also have a mechanical engineering degree from Howard University, Solomon said, and I am, as of this week, the majority owner of Callaway Corporation. The murmur became something larger. He let it move through the room, let it find its level. Then he told them the rest, the short version, the version that conveyed what they needed to understand. Edward, the machine shop, the investment, the agreement, the decision to stay in the background, Edward's death. 15 years of watching and waiting and hoping, and finally, on a Tuesday afternoon through a 14th floor vent, hearing enough. He talked about Friday's payroll. Gerald Marsh and I have worked through the night with 3 separate banking partners to establish emergency operational accounts, he said. Your paychecks will be processed, on time, in full. I want you to hear that clearly, and I want you to hear it from me directly. He paused. Nobody is losing their paycheck because of what's happening. The exhale that moved through 400 people was audible, the specific sound of a held breath releasing. I also know, Solomon continued, that some of you have received phone calls this week, offering opportunities elsewhere. I'm not going to tell you what to do about those calls. That's your decision to make, as it always has been. But I want you to know what this company is becoming, because it might change how you think about the choice. He talked for another 8 minutes. About the layoff list which was cancelled. Fully, not deferred, not restructured, cancelled. About the R&D division which was being restored. Budget, personnel, the projects that had been archived, unarchived. About what Edward Callaway had built and what it had been allowed to become and what it was going to be now. When he finished, the silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then it started, from the back left corner, from Darnell, who started clapping with the straightforward sincerity of a man who has been in this building 22 years and has been waiting, without quite knowing it, for something like this. And it moved through the room, slowly at first, then faster, then, all at once, the way certain things move once they start unstoppably, entirely, with the specific momentum of something that was ready to happen, and just needed a place to land. 400 people standing in the auditorium on the 2nd floor of Callaway Corporation. For a man in a 2012 wedding suit who had been cleaning their offices since before some of them were born. Solomon stood on the stage and let it happen. He did not cry, though he would tell Maya on Sunday that it had been close. Theo Bancroft materialized at Solomon's elbow after the meeting. Ryan Aldridge in IT found something, he said quietly, walking alongside Solomon through the lobby, keeping his voice low with the instinct of someone who had learned the hard way that certain conversations had audiences you couldn't see. On the servers. What kind of something? A program. Theo glanced sideways. Installed remotely. Designed to wipe the primary R&D archives on command. Everything. The full project history. Backup documentation. 5 years of work. Solomon stopped walking. When was it installed? 3 days ago. Theo looked at him directly. Ryan traced the login credentials. It came from Curtis Hale's access profile. Solomon thought about the file he'd put together for Agent Simmons. About the pattern of documents he'd been sending quarterly for 3 years. About the particular kind of desperate that commits corporate sabotage on a Wednesday. Get it to Simmons, Solomon said. Already sent. Friday night, 9:47 p.m. The 15th floor office. Solomon was reviewing trust documentation with Vivian's legal contact, a careful, methodical woman named Patterson, who had been working corporate law for 25 years and approached the 1988 agreement with the focused respect of someone who recognized they were looking at something unusual when his cell phone rang. Unknown number, he knew. He held up a hand to Patterson, stepped to the window, answered. Hayes still, the wrong name. Solomon decided this time not to correct it. I've been thinking, Marcus said. The confidence in his voice was thinner now. Not gone, but thinner the way fabric gets when it's been through too many cycles. About how this ends. All right, Solomon said. There's a version of this that doesn't have to be a war, Marcus said. You've made your point. The documentation is what it is. Fine, but dragging this through courts and headlines for the next 2 years doesn't serve anyone. What are you proposing? $15 million. Smooth, practiced. The tone of a man who has made offers before and knows how to make them sound reasonable. Cash, properly structured. You sign a clean transfer, you walk away. You're 68 years old, Solomon. You've worked long enough. The city outside the window, the lake in the distance, the pewter-black surface of it in the November dark, the lights of the buildings reflected in broken pieces on the water. Solomon thought about a machine shop in 1988. About a man with rolled-up sleeves and 11 rejection letters and a blueprint with a tolerance error that 3 engineers had missed. About what it had meant in that moment to be seen. To be seen correctly. To have the thing you carried acknowledged by someone who understood its value without needing to be told. Your father said something to me, Solomon said, the night we made the agreement. He said the only investment worth making is in someone who shows up when they don't have to. Marcus was quiet. He showed up for me, Solomon said. In 1989, in a city and a time that had been very clear about the fact that it wasn't planning to. A pause. I'm not leaving his company, not for 15 million, not for any number. The silence on the other end had a specific quality. The silence of a man recalibrating. You'll regret this, Marcus said. Quiet. The quiet of genuine threat rather than performance. I have resources and I have time and I am not going to let someone. Marcus? Marcus stopped. I've been patient for 35 years, Solomon said. Don't mistake that for inexperience. He hung up, stood at the window for a moment, then walked back to the table. Sorry, he said to Patterson. Where were we? Saturday morning, 9:15, emergency board session. The room was the same room where 3 days ago Solomon had set a share certificate on a mahogany table and watched the laughter die. The room felt different now, smaller somehow, or maybe just more honest. 12 chairs, several still empty. The board members who had voted against suspension and subsequently decided that being present for what came next was not in their interest. Gerald Marsh came in last. He was a careful man by nature, measured. The kind of CFO who processed everything twice before committing it to paper. He had been Marcus Calloway's right hand for 11 years. Had signed what was put in front of him. Had told himself the stories that people tell themselves when they are doing things they know are wrong but have decided, for complicated reasons rooted in fear and inertia, and the sunk cost of a career, to continue doing. He sat down, put a folder on the table, didn't open it, just sat with his hands flat on either side of it. Like a man at a table who has come to settle a debt and is not sure the settling will feel the way he imagined it. I signed these, he said. The room waited, all of them, still looking at the table. The pension relocations, the offshore transfers, the shell company invoices for R&D budget, the board minutes for decisions that the board never actually voted on. He exhaled once, slowly. I signed them because I was 50 years old and I had a mortgage and obligations, and I convinced myself that I wasn't the one making the decisions. I was just the one documenting them. He looked up, not at Vivian, not at the other board members, at Solomon. The way Gerald Marsh looked at Solomon Hayes in that moment was a specific kind of look. The look of a man who has run out of excuses and knows it and is no longer trying to find new ones. I have watched you clean my office for 15 years, Gerald said. I never asked your first name, He stopped. The sentence didn't finish the way he'd planned. If you can walk into this room, after everything, and do what you did on Wednesday, with the dignity you did it with. He stopped again, jaw tight. Something working in his face that was about more than this company and more than this week. Then I don't have an excuse anymore. He pushed the folder to the center of the table. Full cooperation, he said. With the audit, with the federal investigation. Everything they need. The room was absolutely still. Then Vivian Cross said quietly, without ceremony, "Thank you, Gerald," and meant exactly that. Not forgiveness, not absolution, not anything more than acknowledgement of a man choosing late the right direction. Gerald Marsh nodded once and looked back at the table. The rest of Saturday moved with the accelerating momentum of consequences that had been building for a long time and were now simply arriving. 3:00 p.m. Michael Torres in IT called Vivian to confirm what Theo had reported about the server program. Traced to Curtis Hale's credentials, isolated before activation. The full documentation transmitted to Agent Simmons at 3:47. At 4:30 p.m., 2 FBI agents arrived in the lobby. At 5:15 p.m., Curtis Hale was walked out of the building in handcuffs, which he bore with the stillness of a man who had known this was a possible outcome and had decided not to think about it until it happened. He walked past Solomon in the lobby without looking at him. Solomon watched him go, thought about nothing in particular, thought about everything. Marcus held his press conference on the front steps at 6:00 p.m. He'd changed suits. Of course he had, navy, excellent cut. The kind of preparation that signals I knew this moment was coming and I planned for it. A lawyer on each side. The prepared statement in his hand, not that he needed to read it, he'd clearly rehearsed it enough that the words came out with the smoothed confidence of something practiced until it sounded spontaneous. Solomon watched from Vivian's office on the 12th floor. Laptop on the desk, volume low. November dark outside the windows. A coordinated effort to exploit legal ambiguity and seize control of a company built by my father's sacrifice. He's good, Vivian said. He's always been good, Solomon said. Good at this part. An individual who has never held an executive role, who has never managed a department, led a strategy, or demonstrated any capacity for corporate leadership. He's not wrong about the experience, Vivian said. He's wrong about what experience means, Solomon said. She looked at him. Experience means knowing things, Solomon said. I know this company. I know it from the inside out, from the parts nobody sees. He paused. That's 35 years of something. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said finally, it is. On the laptop screen, Marcus was still talking. Solomon closed it, looked out the window instead. Below on the street outside Callaway Corporation, no announcement had been made. No email sent. No meeting organized. People were gathering. Employees. 30 at first, then 60, then more. Handmade signs. Sharpies on cardboard and printer paper and the backs of manila envelopes. The kind of signs that get made when there isn't time for anything more and the thing you feel is large enough to need to go somewhere. We see you, Solomon. Callaway family. Hayes. Just the name. Just his names in large black letters. Like it was enough. Like it had always been enough. Solomon stood at the window and looked at those people. At the signs. At his name on cardboard held up by hands he recognized from 35 years of passing in hallways. He thought about 1989. About the decision to be invisible. About the choice that had felt like strategy and had also undeniably cost something real. Had cost the years of being seen correctly. Had cost the daily small accumulation of being known. He had chosen it. He did not regret it. But standing at this window on this November night, looking at his name on a handmade sign held by a woman from accounts payable who said good morning every day with sincerity, he felt the cost of it fully for the first time. And he felt also what it meant to be on the other side of it. Vivian came to stand beside him. They stood at the window together for a moment. You have work to do, she said finally. Yes, Solomon said. He turned from the window. He had been invisible for 35 years. He was done with that now. He had work to do, and tomorrow he would begin. 3 months is not a long time. Not when you're measuring it against 35 years. Not when the thing you're trying to rebuild was broken incrementally, quietly, over 15 years of small decisions that each seemed survivable on their own, and only revealed their true weight when you added them all together. February came to Chicago the way February always comes, without apology, without warmth, without any particular interest in whether you were ready. Callaway Corporation was still standing, which in November had not been a certainty. Solomon arrived at 5:17 every morning. Same time, same entrance, same 4-block walk from the train station left on Wacker, right on Michigan, through the north side door that opened cleaner than the revolving entrance in cold weather. Some things you keep because they work. Some things you keep because they remind you of who you are when the room changes around you. The keycard was different now. The elevator was different. The floor it took him to was different. But the walk from the train was the same walk it had always been. The same dark streets, the same pre-dawn quiet, the same city doing its slow, unself-conscious shift from night to morning. He liked that walk. He had always liked it. The 15th floor office had been reorganized in November, the week after everything. The oversized furniture was gone, donated to a non-profit that Vivian had identified, which struck Solomon as exactly the right destination for furniture designed to make visitors feel small. The replacement pieces were simpler, functional. A desk that was a desk. A meeting table that ate comfortably and didn't require anyone to sit at its head to prove something. The wall of executive awards had been moved to the lobby display case. where employees and visitors could actually see them, which seemed like the point of having them in the first place. The window stayed. The view of Chicago from the 15th floor, the lake in the distance, the grid of the city spreading out in every direction, the specific quality of light over the water in every season was worth keeping. Edward Calloway had looked at that view every morning for 20 years. Solomon had looked at it from the hallway for 35. He looked at it now from inside the room, and it was the same city and the same sky. Just a different angle. Finally. The quarterly numbers came on a Tuesday in February. Martha, Vivian's assistant, temporarily reassigned to help Solomon navigate the administrative architecture of running a corporation. A task she had approached with the focused competence of someone who understood that this situation was unprecedented and had decided that was interesting, rather than alarming. Knocked and entered with a folder. Revenue is down 12% year over year, she said. Because Solomon had established, on his first day, that he wanted directness rather than presentation. He opened the folder, studied the figures for a long moment. The surface numbers were not good. Revenue down. Stock price still finding its level after the volatility of November. The market doing what markets do when uncertainty enters a picture, overcorrecting. Treating a transition as a catastrophe. Pricing in fears that the fundamentals didn't support. But underneath those numbers, other numbers. Employee retention up sharply across every department, absenteeism down. The R&D pipeline hollowed out under Marcus, quietly starved of funding for 4 years while the budget was redirected to places that had nothing to do with innovation, showing the first real movement in 2 years. 3 projects that had been archived were now unarchived. Being worked on by people who were working on them because they wanted to be working on them, which was the only reason good work ever got done. Solomon closed the folder. The market is reading the headline, he said. Not the underlying numbers. That's what Vivian said. Martha replied. She's usually right. She also said that. Martha collected the folder. The board is asking about a shareholder communication. Timeline, end of the week, Solomon said. I'll write it myself. Martha paused at the door. The shareholder communication, she said carefully. Most CEOs have their communications team draft. I know, Solomon said. I'll write it myself. She nodded left. Solomon turned to the window, thought about the words. About what it meant to say something true to people who had been told, for 15 years, a version of events that was accurate in its numbers and dishonest in its implications. He would write it himself. Theo Bancroft knocked at 9:0. Sharp, precise. 3 knocks that said, I was here at 8:57, but I did not want to seem eager, so I waited. He came in with a proposal folder and the slightly too large dress shirt that Solomon had come to think of as his professional signature, a man still in the process of growing into the space he was claiming. Internal audit restructuring. Theo said. Set the folder on the desk. Sat down without being invited. Which Solomon had told him to do in November, and which Theo was still slightly self-conscious about. The current flagging system is built to catch anomalies it already knows to look for, which means it consistently misses new categories of manipulation. Solomon looked at the proposal. That's how the pension reallocation ran for 4 years without triggering a single automatic flag, Theo continued. Nobody was looking for it because nobody had seen it before, so the system had no template for it. Solomon read the summary page. Clean thinking, clearly articulated, the kind of proposal that had been thought through rather than assembled. It's good, Solomon said. I know, Theo said. Beat. Solomon looked up. Theo held the eye contact, then almost imperceptibly winced. Sorry. I'm still. Vivian told me to stop apologizing for saying accurate things, and now I'm overcorrecting. You're fine, Solomon said. Don't apologize for knowing your work is good. Do this. He tapped the folder and Theo. Theo paused. The office on 12 is still empty. I know, you could take it. I could. Theo looked at him steadily. But I work better where I can see the floor. Up here I lose track of what the numbers connect to. On 9 I look up from my desk and I can see people. I remember that the numbers are about something. He left. Solomon looked at the closed door for a moment. Thought about a 33-year-old engineer who had once chosen a maintenance position for almost the same reason. The best instincts he had found were often the same instinct dressed in different decades. Trial of Marcus Calloway began in March. 9 counts: financial fraud, embezzlement, obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence. The last 2 added after Curtis Hale's cooperation agreement, which had been thorough and had implicated Marcus directly in the command to install the server deletion program. Curtis received a reduced sentence. Gerald Marsh received a suspended sentence and 3 years probation and a civil settlement that would occupy most of his next decade. Solomon attended 3 days of the trial. He sat in the gallery, quiet, still, the way he had always been in rooms where his presence wasn't the point. The defense's closing argument was 3 hours long. The central claim, inadequate consideration. The argument that $30,000, whatever it had represented in 1988, could not constitute reasonable legal basis for majority ownership of a company now valued in the hundreds of millions. The argument running underneath, unspoken but present the way certain arguments are always present, that Solomon Hayes was not the kind of person this kind of agreement was really meant for. Solomon sat in the gallery and listened to this argument with the patience of a man who had been listening to variations of it for 68 years. The prosecution's response took 40 minutes, and then the door at the back of the courtroom opened. Franklin Webb was 79 years old. He moved with a cane and the specific deliberateness of a man who has been told by 3 doctors to take it easy, and has decided that taking it easy is not something he is willing to do today. Brown suit, the kind that had been good once and was now simply dignified, white hair, hands spotted with age, steadier than they had any right to be given, that he had driven himself to the courthouse this morning against the explicit advice of his cardiologist, his daughter, and his primary care physician. He sat in the witness chair, did not look at Marcus, looked at Solomon, then reached into the inside pocket of the brown suit and removed an envelope. The paper had yellowed to the particular cream color of something kept carefully in a wooden box for 15 years. The edges were soft, not damaged, just held. Edward Calloway gave me this in September of 2009, Franklin Webb said. His voice was the unhurried voice of a man with less time than he used to have, and a better understanding of what that meant. He wrote it 12 days before he died. He asked me to hold it until the day I knew it was right to use it. He placed the envelope on the railing. I believe this is that day, he said. The clerk read the letter aloud. Solomon sat in the gallery and heard Edward Calloway's voice in the sentences, the particular rhythm of how Edward thought. The way he built an argument not by assertion, but by accumulation, laying one true thing beside another true thing until the conclusion became inevitable. The letter said that Edward had maintained the ownership structure precisely because it was not ceremonial, that the $30,000 was not, had never been the point. The point was what Solomon had brought to a workbench in a machine shop in 1988 that had nothing to do with money. The willingness to see something worth believing in and put everything behind that belief. The letter said that Edward had watched his son with growing concern and had made a deliberate choice, not an oversight, not a failure of planning to leave the structure intact, because he trusted Solomon's judgment about timing more than he trusted any legal instrument he could construct. And the letter said, in Edward's handwriting, in sentences that were precise and unhurried and completely clear, Solomon Hayes has been in this company since before it was a company. He has seen every part of it that I built and every part of it that I failed to build well enough. He has never once used what he knew to serve himself. That kind of person, in my experience, is rare enough that when you find them, you do not structure them out of what they helped you create. You wait for them to be ready, and then you get out of their way. The clerk finished. The courtroom was quiet. The judge looked at the defense table for a long moment. The defense had no response to a dead man's handwriting. The verdict came back in 4 hours, 9 counts, guilty on all 9. The sentence 9 years. Solomon sat in the gallery when the verdict was read. He felt not triumph. Triumph requires an enemy, and Marcus Calloway was Edward's son. And Edward had loved him, and this was not the ending Edward had wanted. It was just the ending that had become true. When it was over, Solomon put on his coat, buttoned it, and went back to work in the elevator, late April, a Thursday. Vivian Cross got on at 11. Solomon got on at 13. The timing was entirely accidental. The building was large enough that their paths crossed less often than you might expect, given that they now worked on the same floor. Just the two of them, up. Vivienne looked at the floor numbers changing. Then, with the directness that Solomon had come to understand was her default register when she had decided to say something difficult. I've been on this board for 19 years. I knew Edward. I attended his funeral. I have spent more hours in this building than in my own home some months. She paused. I know the name of the dog Marcus had in 2018, Bruno, a golden retriever, very well behaved. Solomon waited. I did not know you had a daughter, Vivienne said. Until you mentioned it in the shareholder communication. I read it, and I thought I have worked 40 feet away from this man for 19 years, and I am learning his family from a document. The elevator rose. 12, 13, 14. I'm ashamed of that, she said. Solomon looked at the floor numbers. Let the words be what they were without rushing to soften them. I have one daughter, he said, Maya. She teaches 8th grade mathematics in Baltimore. She says 8th graders are the most honest people she's ever met because they haven't learned yet to pretend they understand things they don't. Vivienne smiled. Something genuine in it. She sounds like her father, she said. She's better than her father, Solomon said. She figured out sooner what took me too long to stop being patient about. 15. The doors opened, neither of them moved immediately. Vivienne. He said her name with the weight of someone who had been using it carefully for only a few months after 2 decades of Miss Cross. Don't carry the shame of the past, just use it. Look at the people in front of you differently than you have been. She looked at him. That's all it needs to be, he said. She stepped out. He stepped out. They went to their respective offices, and the conversation stayed in the air of the elevator a little longer, the way certain true things do. Gerald Marsh wrote 187 letters, by hand, one for every employee whose pension contributions had been diverted over 8 years of systematic misappropriation. He found each file, identified each person, wrote each letter personally on his own stationery, not the company letterhead, not the legal firm's template, his own. He explained what had happened, in plain language, not legal language, not the distancing language of someone managing liability. What had happened specifically with their specific account, what had been taken, what was being restored through the civil settlement, and his role in it, not minimized, not framed, just stated. It took him 7 weeks. Solomon found out not from Gerald. Gerald had not told anyone but from Darnell, who mentioned one afternoon in passing that he'd seen Gerald Marsh in the company library at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night, alone, writing by hand on personal stationery, with the focused expression of a man doing something that cost him something. Didn't feel right to interrupt, Darnell said, but I thought you should know. Solomon thought about it that evening. On his way out at 7:30, he stopped outside the library door. Gerald was there, desk lamp, stack of envelopes, his own handwriting moving across paper. Solomon didn't knock. Didn't enter. He went to the coffee machine on 11, the good one, the one that made coffee that tasted like coffee rather than the idea of coffee, and made a cup, brought it back. Set it outside the library door, knocked once, walked away. He didn't need Gerald to see him do it. Some things you do because they're right, and not because anyone is watching. He understood that better than most. Priya Okafor came to Solomon's attention in April. Through Frank Delano, who ran the building services department with the quiet competence of a man who had been doing it for 11 years, and had strong opinions about floor polish, and even stronger opinions about the people on his team. Frank came to the 15th floor still slightly uncomfortable doing it. Still taking a beat before knocking, still adjusting to the new geography of who sat where, and told Solomon about a member of the night cleaning crew, 24 years old. Had been with the company 6 months, did her work completely and without drama, and 3 weeks ago when a software update had crashed the check-in terminal system, and IT had logged it as a known issue to be addressed in the next maintenance cycle, she had fixed it herself, on her own time, in 40 minutes. Hadn't reported it to IT, hadn't mentioned it to anyone, had just fixed it and mopped the floor. 3rd year computer science, Frank said. Chicago State, dropped out in January, couldn't cover the spring tuition. Solomon looked at Frank. Frank looked back with the expression of a man who has done the math and is waiting for someone with the authority to act on it. Set up a meeting, Solomon said. Her. The head of the Education Assistance Program, and David Coe in engineering. She's never met David Coe, Frank said. She's about to, Solomon said. The Education Assistance Program had been announced at the November all-hands meeting. By February, it had been formally structured. Full tuition support for employees pursuing degrees in fields relevant to the company's work. Flexible scheduling arrangements, a modest stipend for transit and materials. Priya Okafor was the first recipient. Her first day in the R&D lab on the 11th floor was a Wednesday in August. She was careful those first 2 weeks, observant. The particular caution of someone who has been given an opportunity they didn't expect, and is not yet certain they're allowed to take up the space it offers. Solomon recognized that caution, had worn it himself once. In the 3rd week, in a whiteboard session with 4 senior engineers working through a structural problem in one of the automation control systems, Priya had a thought. She waited to see if someone else would say it. Nobody did. She picked up a marker, walked to the board, and explained what she saw. A caching inefficiency in the data pipeline, not obvious. The kind of thing you'd notice only if you'd been thinking about how systems failed under load, which she apparently had been doing, quietly for 2 years, because it was the kind of problem that interested her. The engineers listened. One asked a question. She answered it. Another question. She answered that one too. And then all 5 of them were at the board together. And the conversation had that specific quality that good technical conversations get, where nobody is performing understanding, where the best idea wins regardless of who brought it, where the work is the only thing that matters. Solomon was on 11 for a different meeting. He walked past the R&D lab, slowed, stopped. Through the glass wall, Priya Okafor at the whiteboard, marker in hand, 4 engineers leaning in. Nobody looking at their phones. Nobody performing attention. Just real attention. The kind that can't be manufactured. She looked like someone who had been waiting a long time for a room like this one. She looked like she belonged there. Solomon stood at the glass and thought about 1989, about every firm that had not called back, about every room he had been outside of, about the decision, the deliberate, strategic, costly decision to stay invisible. And he thought about the fact that Priya Okafor was 24 years old, and she was inside the room. Not because she had waited 35 years, because someone had opened the door. He turned, walked on. This moment was hers. He was just glad he had lived long enough to make it possible. November came back around. The specific light of Chicago in late autumn, pewter sky, sharp edges, the lake going dark gray in the afternoons, the cold that doesn't negotiate, the city stripped of its summer softness and returned to its honest self. 1 year. The company auditorium. 2nd floor full. Not with the tight-wound anxiety of last November. Not the held breath of people waiting to find out if they still had jobs. Something steadier. Something that had been built incrementally, through 12 months of work that was unglamorous and specific and real. Solomon stood backstage. He didn't have notes. He'd thought about it on the train that morning, arranged the things he wanted to say into a loose order, and trusted that the order would hold. He walked out. The applause started before he reached the microphone. He waited for it to settle. It took a while. He talked about the numbers first, because the numbers mattered and pretending they didn't was its own form of dishonesty. Revenue recovering, the stock price finding its level, the R&D division producing 2 products scheduled for market in Q1, the pension fund restoration on track, every affected employee notified, every timeline confirmed, employee satisfaction at a 10-year high, which was the number Solomon had looked at first every week for 12 months. He talked about what was coming. The employee ownership program phased over 3 years, structured carefully, an actual transfer of equity to the people whose daily work created it. Not a gesture, a change. The Edward Callaway Foundation scholarships for first-generation STEM students and students who had interrupted their education for financial reasons. The first cohort of 12 recipients had been selected. Their names were in the program that had been placed on every seat, and the compensation adjustment for building services. Not a raise, a correction. The people who keep this building running have been paid below market value for more than a decade, Solomon said. We are not generously increasing their compensation. We are correcting an error. There is a difference. A raise implies we are doing something extra. A correction acknowledges we got something wrong. He looked out at the room, at Darnell in the 4th row, at Frank Delano near the aisle, at Priya Okafor, who had come from the night shift and was sitting in the back still in her work clothes, watching with an expression Solomon recognized as the expression of someone who is beginning to understand that the place they are in is different from the place they thought they were in. At the woman from accounts payable 9th floor, 4 years, good morning every morning, whose name Solomon now knew was Renata. He had learned it in December, had knocked on her office door one afternoon and introduced himself properly, with his name, with acknowledgement that they had shared a building for 4 years. And he didn't know the name of someone who had treated him with more consistent humanity than most people with titles 5 levels above hers. She had looked at him for a moment, then said, Renata O.C. It's nice to actually meet you, Mr. Hayes. He had not been called Mr. Hayes by many people in 35 years. He thought about all of it now, standing on the stage. One more thing, he said. The room was very still. I have heard my story described this past year as exceptional, remarkable, inspiring. He paused. I want to say something honest about that. Nobody moved. What happened to me is not exceptional. It is specific. My name, my investment, my degree, my particular arrangement with Edward Calloway, those are specific. But the experience of being in a building and not being seen, of carrying something and not being given the room to offer it, he looked across 400 faces. That is not exceptional. That happens every day, in buildings exactly like this one, to people who are sitting in this room right now. Silence. So, if there is anything worth celebrating today, it is not that I walked into a boardroom. It is that this company, all of us, together decided to start paying attention to who has been here all along. He stepped back from the microphone, and the room came to its feet. Later, after the reception, after the conversations and the handshakes and Darnell pressing Solomon's hand with both of his and not saying anything because some things don't need words, Solomon went upstairs, to the 15th floor office, to the window. Chicago in November, the lake in the distance dark and wide, the city lights, the same view Edward Calloway had stood at for 20 years, the same view Solomon had passed in the hallway for 35. He thought about Edward, about what Edward would make of this building now. Not the furniture, not the carpet, the feeling of the place, the way people walked through it, the way problems surfaced instead of being buried. The way a 24-year-old from the night cleaning crew could stand at a whiteboard on 11 and have 4 engineers lean in and forget to check the time. He thought, yes, Edward would recognize this. He thought, this is what you were building. This is what has always meant. He crossed the room to the wall behind the desk, where a photograph had hung for 15 years. 2 people at a ribbon cutting, 1988. Edward grinning. Marcus at 9 years old, squinting into the sun. 2 people. Solomon took it down, set it on the desk, reached into the leather satchel still kept in the office. The same satchel from the same locker, the one that had held everything for 35 years, and took out the original photograph. 3 people. Edward in the center. Marcus on his right, 9 years old, holding the scissors. Solomon on Edward's left, 32 years old, in the good shirt, laughing at one of Edward's terrible engineering puns that he had always found funnier than he intended to. All 3 of them real, all 3 of them there. He hung it on the wall, stepped back, looked at it. Not at what was in the photograph exactly, at what the photograph meant, at the 35 years of distance between the day it was taken and this evening. At the specific circuitousness of the route from that ribbon cutting to this office. He had not taken the straight road. There had not been a straight road. But he had taken the road that was available, and he had walked it with his eyes open, and here he stood. He turned off the office light, walked to the elevator, pressed the button, stood in the quiet of the 15th floor. The building was emptying out below him. He could feel it. The particular shift in the air when a place transitions from inhabited to still, from the workday to the night. The elevator arrived. He got in. As the doors closed, Solomon Hayes looked at his reflection in the polished metal of the elevator doors. 68 years old, white hair, the 2012 suit he had worn on Wednesday and had worn again today because it was the right suit for the occasion. Hands that had cleaned every surface of this building and signed the documents that owned it. Both things true at once. Always had been. The elevator descended. The lobby was mostly empty. The security desk. The overnight guard. Same rotation as always. Same man Solomon had said good morning to every day for 9 years. Who had started saying good morning back about a year and a half ago, and hadn't stopped since. Solomon buttoned his coat, walked to the north entrance, pushed through into the Chicago night. The cold was immediate, honest, the kind that doesn't negotiate. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looked up at the building, Calloway Corporation, 15 floors. The lights still on in a few of the upper windows, the people who stayed late because they were working on something they believed in. He looked at it the way you look at something you have known for a very long time and are finally seeing clearly. Then he turned up his collar and walked toward the train. Same 4 blocks, same route, same man, just finally fully, completely seen.